Hi, this is Dan from Appliance Repairs, and today I'm going to be showing you how you can interpret the fault codes on your Fisher & Paykel washing machine. This machine I'm dealing with as an example is a Smart Drive 11, so specifically a MW511 model, but the codes that we're talking about and the method of pulling it out is going to be the same across several models, or a lot of models from this generation. So you might have a control panel with more options. Everything's still going to be the same. This is off a 12 GW612, and it will be basically the same as some of the older models. Some of the Smart Drive 9s got a control panel like that, and even older ones. This is a GW4 like that. So they're all based on the same way Fisher & Paykel have been doing fault codes. There are a couple of slight differences I'll talk about. I'm not talking about this intuitive with the Intuitive Eco. I'll do a separate video on how to pull the codes out of that, or the very latest smart drives. I'll just show a photo that look like this, are going to be slightly different, and I'll do separate videos on doing the codes on those. Doing the diagnostics on these intuitives is actually really easy because you've got a screen, which is far easier to read than understanding flashing lights. I found a model here which shouldn't have the strobing effects of having before, so I can show you on the machine. Basically, when your smart drive has a problem, when the computer detects a problem, it will stop and retry several times before it finally gives up and brings up a code. That code doesn't tell you exactly what the problem is sometimes, but it's going to point you in very much the right direction. You'll then have 2 or 3 things to check. And it may be something you can fix yourself, or it may be something that you're going to need a technician to come out and look, but you're at least going to know where to look. There are some user warnings, which is where it plays a tune that sounds like this, and it will flash some of these lights over here. Often I've got a separate video about that, so you can go and look at that. But we're talking about the fault codes, which is when it makes a long piercing sound like this, and that means that there's actually something wrong with the machine, not just a tap turned off or something like that. So sometimes when the machine's flashing the lights up at you when it's first found that fault, it's not actually the correct code. Sometimes it seems to be the lights that it shows aren't what the actual code is. Sometimes it will be, and you can recognize it straight away, but other times you want to go into diagnostic mode and check the code. Now, as a word of warning, if you don't know what you're doing, you probably shouldn't be fiddling around in this mode too much. There's not permanent damage you can do, but you can directly run components, and that kind of bypasses some of the safeguards. So I'm no guarantees. If you do, take this all with a grain of salt, use common sense, and especially if you actually go into the repairs, start trying to repair things, you've got to be really careful working with electricity. Make sure you know what you're doing and that you are legally allowed to do whatever work you're going to be doing. We're going to start off by turning the power off, leaving it plugged in. We're going to press and hold the wash temp down button and press power. It gives 2 beeps, and then we've got an unusual show of lights here. Now, there's a few things we can do. I'm first just going to show you how to read the codes, and then after that I'll show you some of the other things we can do in diagnostic mode if you're interested. From here, we want to press the spin speed up button 3 times. Every time we put it on, another light's going to turn on here. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. When these 2 lights are on here, it's now showing us what fault has happened in the last 8 cycles. And in this case, there's been no fault in the last 8 cycles, so there's no lights on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it have a code, just for our video. So we're going to press wash temp down and power, up arrow, and now we have some lights along here. The method that it uses is a binary system, counting from right to left. So each of these lights is a number. If you don't know binary, that's alright. We can actually just add it up by using a pen and paper. Or you might find in any control boards, they have this little sheet here. And you'll find different sheets floating around on the internet. And basically along the top here, it actually tells you what the value of each light is, so that we can do it that way. So we've got the first light on the right, going from right to left, is worth a 1. That one's worth 2, 4, 8. We have 16 and 32. So if we add 32, 16 and 1, 32 and 16 is 48, and 1 is 49. So fault code 49 in the last 8 cycles. On the back here is a abbreviated list of the most common codes, and in a minute I'm going to go through and tell you what they usually cause, what usually causes them. If we go to code 49, it says phase 2 to 6, cold valve faulty, C48 for service procedures. And then in 48 it says hot and cold valve incorrect feedback signal. Primary source wiring, check valve harnesses are correctly fastened to the valves. Secondary source water valves, check the valve coil resistances. And tertiary source is motor control module. So what I did here is I unplugged the cold valve and then powered it back up again. And because the way these smart drives are designed and they're using the hot and cold valves as a feedback circuit for the DC voltage, it immediately knew there was a fault and brought up that code as soon as it booted up. One of the few codes that will happen as soon as you turn on. Most other codes have to do when a cycle starts. So that was because I had it unplugged. But what we'd usually do here is we'd check those solenoids. You might find the solenoid's failed open circuit or it's running for a little while, then going up the circuit. So I'm going to go through these codes in a second. But just while we're in here, if you've got a earlier smart drive, specifically something with one of these really yellow modules on, the only slight difference is when you first enter Diagnostics, you need to press that advanced button once. And then you can press the 1, 2, 3 up to get the fault code. So that's the difference there. Now on the Smart Drive 11s, they've got a physical out of balance switch still. If we go one step further, and then if I push this bowl back against the out of balance switch, you'll see a light come on and off here. If that switch gets corroded and getting stuck, then that light will stay on even when the switch isn't activated. If you have a faulty out of balance switch, then you'll be getting a separate code because it checks that switch even during the wash. And so that is the way to check the switch there. On anything with those yellow modules or the Smart Drive 9s, the same thing, except that the out of balance switch will bring on one light, and then the lid, because it's not a lid lock, it's a lid switch, that will turn another light on and off. So you can open and shut the lid and make sure that your lid switch is working. The other things we can do here, like if we had that faulty valve signal, sniff that out, is we can run a couple of components directly. I haven't actually got water plumbed up at the moment. If we press hot light turns on there and the hot valve will run. Cold will run the cold valve. I haven't got water connected at the moment. On these models it stays on. On some models you have to hold your finger down for the light to be on. That's a good way to test if you're getting a code saying that you haven't got water. You can test to see if there's water coming through, and then you know whether or not you need to check block filters or something like that. The other component we can run is the drain pump. By pressing the regular button, the drain pump is going to start up and run. A lot of the time components can, especially like valves and drain pump, they can run for a few minutes and then overheat. And so the fact you've got a fault code doesn't mean you just need to go and throw a component in, a new valve or a new pump. You really do need a multimeter and to have some basic diagnostic skills to be able to diagnose what component's faulty. Now there are a couple of other bits of information that are shown here rather than just the fault code. We start off the beginning here. When there's no lights on there, this is actually telling us our our user warning. So in this case, 1, 2, 1 and 2 on together, it's 3. User warning 3 means there was an out of balance code, and there is charts that tell you what the user warning was. So if you haven't noticed what the thing was, we've got one more. It'll tell us where in the cycle that happened. Was it a spin that it went out of balance? Here we have our fault code, and then what we actually have here, I think it's yep. This actually tells us between that one and that one, it tells us our cycle count at how many cycles. The machine counts every cycle it does in its lifetime. And so we could add those numbers up there. That's up to 128. And then you start off 128 is 256, 5, 12, 10, 24, etc. So 256, 5, 12, 10, 24, 2048, 5,000 cycles. So it's had 5,500. Oh no, it's quite a few cycles there. So you can compare that with if we go up another couple more times. There, add those numbers to those numbers, you then get the total cycle count the machine has done. You'll be able to figure out how long ago the fault had happened. Usually I just do a download, so we can actually do a download through this flickering light here into the computer, and it makes it a lot easier to get all that information out. But Most of the time, fault code is what you're going to look. This is the last 8 cycles. We don't need to worry about the exact cycle count that happened. In the last 8 cycles, we had a fault code 49. That's probably the problem we're going to be looking at. Okay, so now you've read the lights to find a fault code. What do you actually do from there? Now this is where actual diagnostic process comes into it a bit more, and that's more than what I can go over in this video. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the most common causes of faults, the most common faults and the most common causes of those faults. And once again, here's where you need to be careful if you try and repair things yourself, that you know what you're actually doing and being safe. This piece of paper here, I've got a PDF of on my screen. You can find online, a bit of Googling, or it comes in the new control boards. And this has just got an abbreviated list of fault codes. It has got some resistances, etc. up here. And we're going to talk about the detailed fault codes. Now what it does is it's got the number, and then beside it you can see where it's got 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, etc. And basically where it says 0 is a light off, and where it says 1 is a light on. So rather than actually having to figure out exactly what code it is, you can just go by the lights being off or on and match up the pattern. First few fault codes are motor controller faults, software issues, etc. The first one I'm going to look at is fault code 9, which is a size setting error. Now when you replace a control module, this code will come up. And actually we'll talk quickly about size setting. I'm not at the machine to show you, but size setting is basically there are 3 different sizes of smart drive. There's the 5.5, 6.5, 7.5, although 7.5 is also the 8. There's and the 6.5 is sometimes called a 7. But the control board needs to know what size of machine it's in, as well as being for the correct model. So here's another menu you better find. Bit of Googling, 517766. It's a service manual for the Smart Drive 11. This particular one's actually for the USA model. It says up here. So you've resistances and that kind of thing. It's just the first one I came across on Google. To enter size set, before with Diagnostics, we press the wash temp. I was going to scroll down there. The wash temp down button and power. All you do is you press the wash temp up button and power, as it mentions here. Talking about size set, temperature up and power button. Then it will make a few beeps and either the cold light, the low light, or the hold light will be on. Cold light is for a 5.5 kilo or small machine, and you'll actually see that on the back of the plastic molding it will say compact. Low is for the medium, the 6.5 kilo, and hold is for the large 7, or because this is for the American market, they call it the 8 kg machine. So you press wash temp up and power, check which model you got, press the wash temp up will turn on the cold light, pressing water level up will turn on the low light, and pressing spin speed up will turn on the hold light. Once you've got the correct light on for your size of machine, you press power and it will save that setting. Because it's saying here it will affect the water levels, high water level can be slightly wrong, and the inlet flow rate calculations can be wrong. So I should have showed you that when I was at the machine, sorry, but I'm at home now. Alright, so pressure sensor fault code 11, pressure sensor in the control board, so that's got to replace control board. Flood protection error, this means that the water level has increased after it thinks it's turned the valve off, so it could be a valve stuck on, or something's happening and the water might be reverse siphoning or something, or it could be a control board that is stuck activating a valve. 36, water leak fault. So this is not usually actually caused by a water leak, or if it is, you'll see water leaking out. But if you have siphoning, so I will make a separate video on siphoning later on, but if the end of your drain hose is sitting too low, then the water can siphon out, and specifically or especially happens at the rinse cycle when it's refilling after it's drained out for the rinse. 37, a very common one, pump blocked error. So this is where your pump's not draining out. Or your pump might be draining out okay for a little bit and then cutting out and overheating. I've got several videos on pumps, so you can look at that. Pressure sensor error, pressure tube fault. Now, it could be that you've got a pressure tube being damaged, it's got a hole in it or a blockage, or got water in the tube. If you replace the control board, you've got to take the pressure sensor tube off. You don't want to just plug it back on again. You've got to blow down, make sure there's no water in the bottom of the bowl, drain all the water out so there's no water in the water level sensing system. Otherwise, if it is a faulty sensor, you've got to replace the control board because it's part of it. 43. So up until the Smart Drive 12, when they did away with the out of balance switch, anything up to Smart Drive 12, the out of balance switch gets corroded. I mentioned before how you could check that the switch is actually switching on and off by going that one step above the fault code Diagnostics. And then the next step up, you can read your out of balance switch. So this is the code you'll get if that switch is corroded. So we're skipping through the codes here. Whoop. I will work out a better way of doing this in the future, sorry. And that's talking again about corrosion. Okay, water and bowl during spin, don't often get that one. Here we've got 3 codes, 48, 49 and 50. Now if you remember, 49 was the code that I had. So this is one of the few codes, any of these 3 will pop up when the power is first turned on to the machine without you even starting a cycle. If it's happening straight away like that, it's usually a faulty valve. It can be a faulty controller. So what you need to do is check the valve with your multimeter, make sure it's at the right resistance for your model, which is actually talked about further up here. We have a list of motor resistance, pump resistance, water valve. This is for 24 volt valves on the later machines. Your resistance is there. So the other thing that can happen too, if the machine's powering on okay, but then runs for a little while and brings up the code, the valves can overheat. So if it's having to sit on for a long period of time, or the valve resistance is a bit low, it will run for a while and then overheat and go open circuit. And as soon as it goes open circuit, you get this code. The other thing too, the resistance is 65 ohms. I believe it lists it at 65, but in reality, it's usually 64. It's usually low. So it's not like the Smart Drive pump where 32, 33 ohms is exactly what you want to bang on 33, and if you get much down towards 30 ohms, you've probably got problems. It's different with the water valves, 64 ohms, and if they start getting down towards 50, that's not a problem. Once you go below 50, 55. So 55 to 60 is okay. Once you go below about 55, you've probably got a problem. I have had some which will fill up the whole bowl full of water and then just finally overheat, the last few centimeters it's filling up. So its resistance is not such a big indication on the water valves until they go open circuit. Then you know you've got a problem. Right, where were we up to? So those are those 3 codes there. Diverter valve failure. Now one of these, here we go, diverter top-up fault. So if you've got an eco machine, and we'll talk about eco faults, eco getting the diagnostics later, but if you've got an eco machine and the diverter valve has got a blockage in it, when it goes to recirculate for eco, you actually end up pumping some water out, so this 52 pops up, and that's usually a blockage in the valve itself. Or it can be a faulty valve which is not sealing, but you've got to check for blockages. Bowl check no valid. Now there's a few bowl check faults. This is often caused by, or can be caused by grit or something in the spline drive, or the spline drive itself being worn. It can sometimes be triggered by faulty RPS, as it says down here, secondary source RPS fault. So that's something else to look at. We have a few pressure transducer error codes. They are, again, pressure transducers in the control board, so control board fault, a comms faults, and so you're going to be trying to determine whether it's between the motor controller or the harness. That is not really a common one. 105 motor controller or the display board, really. Fault 130. So 130 and 131, and also 136. So these two mean the rotor position sensor, the sensor on the motor, is not giving a correct signal. Usually corrosion. So 130 is the one you'll start getting to start with, and then as it gets worse and worse, you'll get the 131, and then the machine just refuses to go. 136 is the motor stall. Now this is usually, if you haven't already done work on the machine, it's usually a faulty RPS. So if the rotor position sensor is saying that the motor is not turning, or not turning the direction it's expecting, then you'll get this 136 rather than a 130 or 131. If you've had the motor off, then it pays to check that you've actually plugged the wires in the right way around. All 3 wires on the motor have to go in specifically. There's a marking on the motor. In the plastic, you'll see a little molding red, yellow, blue. And so you need to make sure you get that round the right way. Bowls re-engage itself during agitate. It can be loss of water, or it can be something to do with the spline drive in the bottom of that bowl, clean out the soap scum. EEPROM, phase link error, EEPROM, etc. Those aren't very common. Lid lock open circuit, I don't think I've had lid lock codes. Lid locks are pretty robust on these machines. Temperature sensor error. There's a few different temperature sensor errors. This one's the only one mentioned here by the look of it, but they are usually to do with it going higher than 100 degrees or lower than 0 degrees. Of course, going higher than 100 degrees means your water's boiling. That's not usually going to happen. Lower than 0 can happen if you're got something outside and the water's starting to freeze. But if the sensor's slightly out of calibration and it starts to freeze, the motor controller will start throwing errors, which case you can replace the sensor, or you just got to get it somewhere warmer. There are two more codes, 240, 242. Oh, sorry, 240 is just, the RPS. That's more common to see on the later model smart drives. So when you're getting onto the 12s and 13s, that kind of thing, you'll sometimes get a 240 rather than the earlier 130, 131 codes we had further on. Out of balance, 242. I don't know if I've seen this one very often, but as it's saying fault code 43, it's the same thing, out of balance switch. And 243, yes, that's the other high number RPS code you'll get. So most of the issues we'll get on these machines will be pump blockages, faulty RPS, or a faulty inlet valve. Those are kind of the common issues we'll get straight off the bat. Anything else other than that, what you can do is you can find the service manual, and if you've got a code that's not on here, find the service manual, have a read through, and it will tell you more exact information step by step what's expected. But again, before you start digging into that, you need to know what you're doing for safety. And also, a big part of diagnostics is knowing what a machine is meant to do. And that just takes experience and time working with machines. So if you're trying to fix something yourself and it's not a common code, or it's not the first thing on the list, then unfortunately you probably are going to have to get a technician out to it, because it's going to be something where you're going to need to know what the common problems are and what the machine is meant to be doing, so that you can find what the actual cause is. I will be making more videos, as I said, on the intuitive and the newer models, and I probably will at some point go more in depth on how smart drives work and diagnostics, more like a for an apprentice kind of video. But for user explanation, hopefully this will give some people some ideas. All right, have a good evening. Cheers.